Hi gardeners! It's March and spring is here. Now that the warmer weather has arrived, it's time to start planting warm season crops. These include beans, corn, cucumbers, eggplant, melons, okra, peppers, southern peas, squashes, and tomatoes. A couple things to note. First of all, eggplant and tomatoes are mostly just on the list for North Florida. Both of those take a really long time to mature, and if they're not planted early enough in the season, then they might not have enough time to mature and start producing fruit before the intense summer heat and humidity arrive in Central and South Florida. And even though they like warm weather, too much heat and humidity will stress them and kill them. In South and Central Florida, we can still plant cherry tomatoes from seed at this time, but if we try to plant big tomatoes from seed in March, they're not likely to grow fast enough to mature before the hot, rainy weather arrives. One variety that does particularly well, even in the summer and the heat, is Everglades cherry tomatoes. They're a very small tomato, and they do well even in our hot weather. Usually, as a rule of thumb, the smaller the tomato, the better it will do with the heat. If you're wanting to plant big tomatoes in March and you're in South or Central Florida, then the best thing to do is to just get some tomato seedlings that have already been growing for a month or two and transplant those into the garden instead of starting the big tomatoes from seed in March. Also, just note that DS stands for direct sowing. So as you can see, most of these crops do best when the seeds are planted directly in the garden instead of being transplanted. March is a transitional month that starts out cool and ends with warmer weather, but the transition happens at slightly different times depending on where you are in Florida. As you can probably guess, South Florida heats up fast and North Florida stays cool longer. In fact, some of the northern counties don't have their average last frost date until late March and even April in some places. So they still have to be careful about keeping warm season crops protected for a while longer than Central and South Florida. On the other hand, North Florida may be able to keep their cool season crops going a little longer than Central and South Florida. According to the University of Florida, we all can still plant a select few types of cool season crops, which includes arugula, carrots, Chinese cabbage, bunching onions, radish, and Swiss chard. I somewhat question whether warmer parts of Central and South Florida will actually have much success with these crops if planted in March, but you can still test them out. I would just plan on planting any cool season crops in the first half of March, if at all possible. I don't think I have personally ever started any of these crops any later than February, but I've had some of them still continue to grow in April and even May from earlier plantings, so I would still give it a try if I wasn't able to plant them any earlier. As the list of cool season crops grows shorter, the list of heat-loving tropical plants that we can start in March grows longer. In March, this really only applies to Central and South Florida. North Florida will have to wait until April to join the party. You'll want to wait until after your last average frost date has passed and the days are becoming consistently warmer to plant any tropical crops, or else you can start them in a greenhouse or indoors until the weather warms up. I'll put a link in the description below the video to where you can find your last average frost date. Crops we can start in March that thrive in our hot weather include amaranth, arrowroot, calabaza, chaya, chayote, gingers and turmeric, katuk, loofah, malanga, moringa, papaya, passion fruit, pigeon pea, pineapple, roselle, Seminole pumpkin, sugarcane, sweet potatoes, taro, tropical greens and tropical spinaches, and yucca. Just remember, these are heat-loving tropical plants, so you want to wait until after the weather really gets warm before starting these. It may be best to wait until the second half of March to plant tropical plants. and for the cooler northern parts of Florida, it's better to wait until April. Since March is a transition month, I would try to get all of my cool season plantings done early in the month, followed by warm season crops in the beginning and middle of the month, and then plant the tropical crops at the end of March. Personally, I try to finish my cool season plantings in February and just plant warm season and tropical crops in March. There are also quite a few herbs that can be started in March. These include anise, basil, chives, comfrey, coriander, dill, fennel, lavender, lemon balm, marjoram, mint, oregano, parsley, rosemary, sage, tarragon, and thyme. As we come to a close, I'll leave you with a couple of final tips. Since the weather starts to turn hot during March, I usually put up some 30 or 40% shade cloth over my cool season crops when the daily highs start to be 85 degrees and higher. I try to place the shade cloth in such a way that it still allows full sun in the morning and late afternoon, but provides some shade during the hottest part of the day. And one last thing to keep in mind is that March is still in our dry season, and the increasing heat is going to dry the soil out even faster. So I start watering more frequently as the weather gets hotter. Well, I hope you all get to spend plenty of time in your gardens enjoying our lovely spring weather. Happy gardening!